with a squat plug-in.
Yeah, buddy. Lightweight, baby!
What's up, guys? I'm Josh and I Lift Things, and today I am here to talk about your foot stance or width on the leg press and how that changes the activation of your glutes, quads, and hamstrings. So similar to Monday's video where I discussed isolating the long head and the short head of the bicep and how you can't really do it, today I'm hoping to dismiss another community that seems to plague the fitness online influencer space. This video will also be piggybacking off of my EMG data sucks video, so if you haven't seen that, feel free to click the link in the top right hand corner of your screen. Anyways, let's get into it. The claim or the theory that I really want to dig into is that changing how your feet are positioned on the leg press will significantly change the activation of the musculature of your legs. Either how wide or narrow you put your feet, if you point them in or out, if you put them higher or lower on the platform. I do narrow squats to really nail my quads. Wide stance is cheating. It uses more glutes and adductors. To really hammer my glutes, I like to do a high foot position with a squat plug-in. The next point I like to touch on is if it even does change the activation, is that useful for hypertrophy, for injury prevention, or anything else? So first off, as per usual, I think we need to cover some basic anatomy. The legs are typically broken down into 3 or 4 general muscle groups: the quads, the hams, the glutes, and, like everyone likes to avoid, the calves. This is extremely oversimplified, and it's also forgetting about the adductors and abductors. We're not really going to be talking about calves here, one, because it's spoilers for an upcoming video, so make sure you subscribe to see that, but also because it's not really going to be used all that much in a leg press or squat. Sure, the gastrocnemius is an active knee flexor, but we're not touching on that here. As the name would imply, the quads, short for the quadriceps femoris, is a muscle group that is on the anterior upper thigh, basically the front of your upper leg, and it contains 4 main movers. These 4 are the rectus femoris, the vastus lateralis, the vastus medialis, and the vastus intermedius. Some more recent evidence has shown that there's actually a 5th muscle, but we're not really going to be touching on that. We're going to try to keep things basic for now. All of these muscles are responsible for knee extension, except the rectus femoris, which also crosses the hip joint, where it is also responsible for hip flexion. It's very easy to remember where these muscles are. The lateralis runs laterally, or on the outside of your body. The medialis runs medially, or closer to your midline. The intermedius is between the two, but is actually deeper than all the other muscles combined. It is not near the surface of the skin. And then the rectus femoris, which covers most of the quad. There's a lot more details that can be added here, but we're getting slightly out of scope of things. So let's move on to the hamstrings. The hamstrings are, again, just another muscle group which is comprised of 3 different specific muscles: the semitendinosus, the semimembranosus, and the bicep femoris. These all flex the knee and extend the hip. The 2 semi-muscles also help to internally rotate the knee when you are in slight flexion. The bicep femoris, as the name would imply, has 2 heads, bicep, bicycle, and it does something else. Both heads of the femoris help to externally rotate when the knee is slightly flexed, but the long head also helps to externally rotate when the hip is extended. So we've covered a whole lot of words here. Let me try to show you some examples. Knee extension. Extension. Hey, there's a cat. Buddy. Yeah. This is knee flexion. 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 During flexion, this angle closes. During extension, it opens. This is hip flexion. I'm gonna lose all advertisers if I fucking start air humping. So for hip extension, imagine the positive part of a movement when you're doing a hip thrust. For hip flexion, imagine bringing your knees up to your chest. Now quickly, I would like to touch on the adductors and the abductors. For a quick recap, adduction is bringing something closer to your midline. Abduction, abduction, is instead bringing something further away from the midline. You can remember this by thinking about being abducted. If aliens were to try to abduct your arms out, they would be pulling away. Abduction, adduction. So naturally, your thigh adductors work to bring your knees closer to the midline of your body, while your abductors work to force them out. You've maybe seen this in a hip adduction or abduction machine, or what are commonly referred to as good girls and bad girls. One is where you close your legs against pads, and one is where you open out against pads. Now, the glutes, or your ass, is comprised of a lot of tiny muscles, but more specifically, people are normally talking about the gluteus muscles. Specifically, the most superficial and the largest and most powerful of all of them, the gluteus maximus. There's also the glute medius and the glute minimus. The gluteal muscles mainly act as abductors of the hip, as well as thigh extension, but some also minorly assist in adduction, external and internal rotation of the thigh. Now, a lot of these tiny muscles that help in abduction or adduction, such as the piriformis, are not really ones that you've maybe heard of, let alone things that you would try to specify your training around. You know, unless you're doing some myofascial release work, most of you have probably never even heard of the piriformis, which is fine. These tiny little muscles won't experience nearly as much hypertrophy as the other larger ones, and they aren't that prime movers during these movements that we try to do. Most men will typically be just fine training their glutes or their hamstrings or their quads without worrying too much about specifically focusing on your adductors. This is a very important idea for exercise selection and for training philosophy in general. You don't have to focus on every single tiny muscle. When you're doing a pull-up, you're worried about your lats. You're not going to be worrying or thinking about your supraspinatus. Instead, you can just look at a common theme between all muscles and then try to train their executive function. For instance, the quads extend the knee. The hamstrings flex the knee. They also extend the hip. The glutes extend the hip. Just knowing these basic rules of biomechanics, we can already design a pretty effective workout routine for your legs. Now, let's look at a squat or a leg press and examine what is happening. Knee and hip flexion on the way down, knee and hip extension on the way up. Therefore, the quads, the hamstrings, and the glutes will all be used during a movement like this, some more than others. So the question is, does a tiny little change in your foot position, remember, either if they're facing in, straight, or out, if they are closer or further apart, or higher or lower on the platform, does it actually change anything? Whoa, weird, shirt change. Let's look at some EMG data. Effects of technique variations on knee biomechanics during the squat and leg press. So 10 experienced male lifters perform the squat, high foot placement, LPH, low foot placement, LPL, wide stance, WS, narrow stance, NS, and 2 foot ankle positions, feet straight, and then feet turned out to 90 degrees. No differences were found in muscle activity or knee forces between foot angle variations. Therefore, toes pointed straight ahead or pointing 30 degrees out didn't seem to change anything. The squat generated greater quad and ham activity than the high foot position and the low foot position. The wide stance, high foot position generated greater activity than the near stance, high position, which that makes sense again when we were talking about external rotation for the hamstrings, where the near stance squat produced greater gastroc activity than the wide stance squat, the gastroc being the main muscle of the calf. They did not check which head of the gastroc was active, so that's interesting. Tibiofemoral compressive forces, PCL tensile forces, and patellofemoral compressive forces were greater in the squat than the leg press, stands to reason, and there were no differences in knee forces between the high foot placement and low foot placement. Interesting. Here's another study, influence on feet position and execution velocity on muscle activation and kinematic parameters during the inclined leg press exercise. So they compared 5 inclined leg press exercise variations, varying the feet width stance 100% or 150% of hip width, the feet rotation 0 and 45 degrees externally rotated on the foot plate, and using 2 different movement velocities. Muscle activation presented no differences between conditions regarding feet width stance or feet rotation. For men, the greatest muscle activation was for the vastus medialis, followed by the vastus lateralis, rectus femoris, and gluteus medius, while in women, the greatest muscle activation was for the vastus medialis. Another one, analysis of muscle activation during different leg press exercises at sub-maximum effort levels, so perhaps that throws a little bit of a co-founder in there. They had 14 women perform 3 leg press exercises, 45-degree leg press, a high foot placement, and a low. The EMG activity of the rectus femoris, lateralis, bicep femoris, gastroc, and gluteus maximus was recorded. Results suggested the mechanical changes affect lower limb muscle activity, and that is related to the load used. At moderate effort levels, the rectus femoris and gastroc were more active during the LP45 and LPL than during the LPH. At a high effort level, the rectus femoris and vastus lateralis, quadriceps, were more active during the LPL than the LPH. Again, the rectus femoris and gastroc were more active during the LP45 and LPL than the LPH. On the other hand, gluteus maximus activity was greater during the LPH and the LPL. So these guys are giving some credence to the idea of using a higher foot position in order to target the gluteus maximus more. Here's a very interesting study pointing out some more gender differences. Women compared with men are less able to activate the hamstrings and or more able to activate the quadriceps. Women may require disproportionately greater training for the hamstrings compared with the quadriceps. So this is an interesting thing to mention. As far as having greater glute activation during a higher foot placement on the leg press, does that at all have anything to do with mind-muscle connection? Girls who train are flexing their ass pretty often. That's a thing that's often done. Is it at all possible that because they are able to better contract it and they think that a movement is already going to have a greater focus on it, that they maybe contract it more? Who's to say? That is just me throwing out some conjecture. This is stuff I've worried about before. A lot of girls seem to have a problem with bench press. Obviously, they will have, on average, less muscularity in their chest than men will, but guys also are sitting there flexing their fucking pecs all day, making them dance, and are doing bench all the time. Does that have anything to do with how much we can track something? I mean, mind-muscle connection obviously plays a factor, but who's to say how much it actually is influencing these EMG results? Here you have a great article, Are Close Stance Squats Really More Quad Dominant, from Stronger by Science. So here they are covering the study of three-dimensional biomechanical analysis of the squat during varying stance widths by Escamilla. The participants were nationally competitive masters of at least 40 years old. The average weight of the group was 200 pounds, and the average squat was 500 pounds. So some pretty fucking strong people. Narrow stance squatters took a stance around shoulder width, and medium stance squatters took a stance of around 1.25 to 1.5 times shoulder width, and wide stance squatters took a stance around 1.5 to 2 times shoulder width. So here's the graph discussing knee dominance throughout the movement, and as you can see, wide stance actually had a much higher knee dominance for full depth, for 90 degrees, knee flexion, and at the sticking point, directly going against the bro science of go closer together for more quad activity. Now, with all that being said, the typical caveats of EMG data still apply, and the caveats of EMG data apply to both camps. The group that says that there is no major detectable activation differences between muscle groups in the leg press when you're altering things like foot stance or foot width, as well as the camp that says there is a measurable difference in activation of muscle groups. There is no good longitudinal study or even a study using ultrasound to try to detect differences in hypertrophy between one form of leg press versus another to actually give us any real conclusions. And biomechanically, there isn't that much reason to think that there would be that much greater activation when doing something like this. And even if there is more activation, it doesn't even really matter, as activation in EMG data words does not even imply or indicate a long-term growth. Watch my EMG video or just read studies like this. There are numerous of them. Greater electromyographic responses do not imply greater motor unit recruitment, and hypertrophic potential cannot be inferred. Some people say, well, I definitely feel it more in my glutes. That doesn't really matter. Unfortunately, it sucks to say, but this is an issue that tons of people have. They think, oh, I'm a little bit sore today. That does not indicate much of anything whatsoever. Placebo is real, and tons of things can make you sore that don't just necessarily correlate with hypertrophy. And even if you could get slightly more glute activation out of something like a leg press, why would you want to? You're instead just making a movement more awkward or potentially feel worse on your joints, maybe requiring a lower weight, just to try to get some more juice out of something that isn't a prime mover during that lift. Sure, if you're really scrambling for time, I guess do what you gotta do, but if you wanted more bicep activation during a bench press, you wouldn't all of a sudden start using a suicide grip. You would train bench and then you would train biceps. Why not do just a regular leg press or squat and then do additional hamstring or glute exercises? That way you can take primarily your quads, the prime mover in a leg press or squat, and take them close to failure, and then you could spend your time actually achieving a better stimulus with less volume by doing a direct glute or hamstring isolation movement. So this harkens back to my rant on exercise selection. Stop picking movements based on random EMG data or random influencer recommendations. If you see a video that says, if you want this, do this, or if it fucking highlights a portion of a muscle in red and then it wants you to do some weird exercise variation and target it, quit watching those and quit listening to them. Pick a movement that allows for a full range of motion. Pick a movement that feels comfortable on your joints and soft tissue. Pick a movement that is easily progressible, and pick a movement you have a good mind-muscle connection with. Anything else is purely a meme. It either has no basis in reality, such as training your lower chest, or is so practically weird it's not even worth considering, such as using crazy meme foot positions on a leg press. If you feel more comfortable going toes in, go toes in. And don't let someone tell you, oh, you're not hitting your adductor magnus when you're doing that. They don't know what the fuck they are talking about. And guys, that is the video. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, maybe leave a comment, let me know why I'm an idiot or why I'm wrong or why you love me, and maybe share to a buddy that's doing some weird leg press things. If you really want to support me, you can follow all these socials down below. I post exclusive content there sometimes, not all that often. I just hit 1,000 followers on Facebook off of one video that randomly blew up and got 600k views. I don't know why that happened. Facebook sucks. But if you came from Facebook, hey, how's it going? And as always, thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.